Stacy Ruverall, and I'm with Joe Fulcher at his home in Crab Point in Morehead City, North Carolina. Today's date is August 3rd, 2000, and this is my tape number 8300JF.1. And later on during the interview, hopefully, his son Travis Fulcher will be joining us. Okay. I thought maybe we could start by one of the things I've been doing is talking to people about what defines Down East geographically and culturally.
If you come from Carteret County, it's east of North River. If you talk to somebody from Raleigh, it's anything east of there. So you hear the news people talking about down east, and they're talking about Greenville, Weiston, and places like that. But people along the coast down east is really the fringes of the Outer Banks, and the mainland just adjacent to Sounds, I would say. Fore Sound, Back Sound.
What about, what kind of defines the Core Sound area? What traditions are central?
Geographically?
Yeah, or just the different kinds of traditions, decoy carving, road building. What are the things that really make
The biggest
Core Sound?
industry in Core Sound is probably commercial fishing. That's most everybody at some point in time, part of their family, if not all of it, has been involved in some form of commercial fishing. Since World War II, a good many people have made a drive to Cherry Point every day, and so that's created a job for a lot of the last 50 years anyway. Before then, it was predominantly commercial fishing, commercial hunting, basically some timbering, a little bit of farming, but not as much as you would think in the Down East area. Basically, that was it. It used to, not in recent years, but it used to be a good market for oysters out of that area. It was an oystering market. And back when everything moved by boat, it was almost essential to work around the water, in the water, or something, because all the major commerce was on the water. The road system wasn't nowhere near where it is today.
A number of people talked about the water as really being one of the defining aspects of life and history and culture here.
It was, it was more than just a job. It was, they lived off of it. I mean, certain seasons you did certain things. You salted fish and put them in barrels for subsistence through the winter. I mean, you had to eat out of this too. It wasn't just a grow it and sell it deal. Very few people that grow up in this area hate seafood. In some of the cases, you might get tired of eating it.
Right.
But that's and there was some cattle and sheep and some farm enterprises mixed in with it, and most every family down there had some kind of garden and vegetables to go along with whatever there was. And but they didn't get in the car and run to Moorhead or run to Beaufort every day. If they got to town, well, town would have been Beaufort then. There might have been once a month, once every 6 weeks, and it was probably by a Sharpie sailing the waters to get there, where they would pick up barrels of this, barrels of that, and bags of the makings, they would say, to go along with whatever meat you killed or caught.
So the geographic isolation factored in
more or less
initially.
forced you in the water.
Yeah.
Just for commerce to even exist, it had to be on water.
Tell me more about the different traditions that came out of the water.
Well, other than the obvious fishing, the boat building industry was, especially small boats. There's a particular skiff that was born in this area called the Spruceville Sail Skiff. That was predominantly a Carter County type skiff. That was a workboat. carry a lot of sail, could move pretty good. And the bigger work boats was a Sharpie, which is a flat bottom shallow draft boat, had a center board in it, bigger sails, and they were used for everything from long hauling to oyster dredging. And I guess they actually used some of them for menhaden purposes when they first started fishing menhaden. So it was all brute force. I mean, the boats, most of it was sail or with a push oar. The water was so shallow, you stand up and push the boat along with the oar. Rowing wasn't that dominant down there as I grew up anyway. Most of them old timers thought they'd died and gone to heaven when the outboard motor got give up.
Made things a little easier.
Made things a little easier if you could keep it running.
What about the kinds of qualities or characteristics that make Downeasters unique?
Well, each little community is clannish. They kind of keep to themselves in most cases. Families has always been important. Up until later years, they're saying how some used to be big families. It wasn't uncommon to have 12, 13 people, children in a family, and sometimes back in the 1800s, a man might marry 2 or 3 times. So women had a hard life and they died young, and there'd be half brothers and all this stuff. In several families I know of that they were that way. Big families, and like I say, they had the same father and maybe 3 different mothers involved in it over a period of 60 years. And I would say clannish is probably you can get a sense of if you're an outsider and you walk into one of the general stores down there and say in the early 50s and you start talking, well, I'm looking for so and so, and everybody's quiet. You're looking for them, you're either a game warden, fish commissioner, or some reason why you got the phone, or a sheriff or something, and nobody wants to get involved in the other person's business. So unless they know you, you don't talk to them. They don't talk to you, most cases.
So looking after one another in that way.
Yeah, they kind of, and people from Atlantic, people from Cedar Island, little communities, they kind of stick together with their own group. But they tell it around Atlantic, where my mother's people were from. That my granddaddy and great uncle, used to sail a Sharpie Saturday nights from Atlantic to Cedar Island just to fish fight and have something to do. And I don't know if this is any true or not. But when you get in a little community, you got big families. Directly, you look around, and if you're going to get married, you got to go somewhere else because you're kin to everybody in that community. So they start sailing to this one or sailing to that one, and that's how things spread. Most of the cases back then, people that got educated, any amount of education, had money and had to leave the county. The school system, they had grammar school, but very few people ever finished school, much less go to college.
Would people just go work on the water, basically?
Well, it was a necessity. They get to a certain age, it's like farmers. What little income they made had to be off of whatever they could get. The more hands at it, the better the output. So that was more or less it. And much today, like it used to be in North Carolina, everything, when I was a kid, all the school systems and all went around how the tobacco crops were coming in.
Right.
In other words, you didn't start school in no time until the 1st September. All that tobacco had to be out of the field. Well, it was the same way with them. I mean, you come to school one day and the mullets are running, so you go to fishing. You don't go to school.
Right.
Or during duck season, the ducks are moving, so you go hunting. If you're a market hunter or the term market hunter, that means you're shooting as fowl to sell, just like you would fish.
How did it change things when World War II and also Cherry Point?
Well, up until, I would say, probably a lot of houses didn't even have electricity until after World War II. The whole nature of everything changed, of course, after a big industrial mobilization such as a war. But the the number of people that got drafted in the military and went off other places and learned different trades and come back or didn't come back here helped in some ways, because it at least made them aware there's more to do than just sitting in the water. And with the onset of Cherry Point and Lejeune, and there's airfields that right here in this county. There's an airfield in Atlantic. There's boat field, and all these Marines that were stationed here from other places marry local girls, and a lot of them stayed here, and they had different trades and things like that. Cherry Point was probably the biggest economic thing that happened, not just in Carter County, but in 5 or 6 counties adjacent to it, because they hired at a good rate, good wage rate. They offered benefits such as retirement and hospitalization. That was a thing never heard of before World War II for anybody down here.
How did that affect like the fishing industry with alternate work being available like that?
Well, it made more people part-time at it. I don't know that it hurt the decline of fishing as far as the amount of fish being caught, but it gave people money to do things with it to upgrade their gear, and the part-time fishermen become a statistical challenge to the commercial fishermen, and it is today as far as the amount of stuff caught.
Right.
And in fact, there's a moratorium on license now because of this type of thing.
It was a big issue in the Chesapeake.
Yeah. See, well, that's where I fit in, because I never really derived an income as such. I sold crabs and stuff and played at it when first of the season, but I always had another job. I'm a carpenter by trade, or that was just a sideline or a part-time job, and there was a full-time job. And when you get an economy that's based on fishing, and all of a sudden you've got all these people that don't have to work, and they're out there competing with those people that does have to do it, then it hurts somewhere. It's got to, and that's been the thing. And over the years, you said since World War II, right after World War II, the generation that I'm involved in has come up, is more educated. There's less of them that stayed in the water. A lot of them is retired from places and come back here and bought homes and stuff, and now they're playing in it. I say playing in it. They don't have to do it. They're there competing with a man that's still trying to do it. And plus the fact that you've got all these other factors that's come into being since then, such as pollution. There's a lot more the agricultural runoffs, the amount of just people that's influxed, that's made on the county, the sewage systems. Just everything is ballooned. It's slowly swung from a marine-oriented fishing environment in Carter County to a tourist-oriented environment, and that's where the big money is in Carter County now. It's in the service industry. It's not in the catching the fish. It's in running the restaurants and stuff like this.
Now, where does your family story fit into some of these changes in Carteret County?
My family kind of was commingled in both ends of it. My mother's people, which were Nelsons from Atlantic. My granddad was Daley Nelson. Had 3 brothers. All of them were in the commercial fishing industry. Father retired out of the Coast Guard.
Really? Yeah.
And he spent, so that was another economy too. There was a lot of Coast Guard people in this county. He spent a lot of time on lifeboat stations and stuff. The commercial fisherman until the day he died.
So he went back into the water.
They went back into water.
Yeah.
And
is that common?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real common. I know a lot of people that's fishing now, running boats. A lot of these charter boat captains have retired out of the Coast Guard, Navy, or something. the license and all that they're requiring. A lot of them got it when they're in the service.
So they retire and go into party boat captaining?
Some of them do.
Some of them, yeah.
Or other, some running trawlers, different things. I know several of them that's, going back in the water as commercial fishermen. And their attitude toward it now is, well, I got a little bit coming in, covers my bills. If I don't want to go today, I don't go. And it's not a full-time job to them anymore. It's a supplementary job to their retirement check. And a lot of them from Cherry Point's done the same thing.
How do you think that affects the person's or the family's relationship with the water?
I don't know if it changes that. It's just, you're born in it. I don't know how to explain it. It's just.
But maybe you're not as dependent on it economically.
Right. You're not. It's not a have-to deal anymore. In most cases.
But it sounds like people can't stay away from it.
Well, it's just like in my case. I was born right here in Moorhead. Grew up in Moorhead. When I graduated in 1965, there was 203 or 4 of us graduating. And I bet there's only 30 or 40 of them lives in the area now. Out of that number.
Really? Wow.
I would say better than half of my class went off to school further than high school. A lot of them stayed wherever they're at, Raleigh, wherever, Greenville, places where they could get jobs in whatever they were trained to do. Some of them come back as teachers, some, filter back a little bit at a time, and whenever jobs come. There's never been, other than Cherry Point, anything down here that industry-wise that pays a good, steady salary, that employs a lot of people for any length of time, that's got any kind of benefits on the end of it. Next to Cherry Point, probably county government, or one time the sanitary restaurant employed about as many people as anybody around here.
Wow.
It was more or less on a part-time basis because it was high school and college kids, when I was growing up, through the summer jobs there.
Did you ever work there?
I worked there for 5 years.
Yeah.
Most everybody who grew up here worked at one of these restaurants. And here again, I had the chance, and I did mess around in the water, party boating and all, but working in the water ain't all fun. I mean, you can spend some bad days out there. It's rainy, it's rough, it's tired. You're right in days like today. You're in the sun all day long. The hours are long. If you're working on a party boat, it starts 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and it quits whenever 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. If you're a shrimper, you sleep half the day. 5 or 6 o'clock, you pull a net all night. It depends on what you're geared to do.
Right.
And the ones that have made anything out of it have been able to adapt to whatever's going on. In other words, they fish during fish season, shrimp during shrimp season, scallop during scallop season, right. The whole thing. And they have several boats because it's almost more economical to keep 2 or 3 boats geared different than to switch one around so much. Sizes and what you're doing with it. In my uncle's case, they had 3 or 4 boats. They've all passed on now. It's like everything else; it ages out. And of the ones of my cousins, off of them, there's only 2 of them that's involved in commercial fishing. The other 7 or 8 of them that I can think of is doing something else.
And you opted to go into carpentry, is that right?
Well, my case is kind of a little bit, in one sense of the word. I actually went to college. Some people don't realize. I got an associate degree in mechanical drafting. At the time I went, it was a good paying job. Now it's just a key punch operator's job and minimum wage almost. And I did work for the county for 8 years as a tax mapper. I'll start off earlier than that. When I got out of high school, I went to Lenore Community College for 2 years. Spent 4 years in the Coast Guard. Due to the fact that Uncle Sam was trying to send me to Vietnam. It was a bad time being 1A, 1965, 66, 67, along there. You didn't last too long out here on the streets. You were drafted in something.
Right.
And a lot of my friends went over there, and one or two of them I can think of offhand didn't come back. But that's life. But and a bunch of them at the same time killed right around here local in car wrecks and stuff like that. So life is in every community the same way. You got a certain amount of turnover at all ages. But I did spend 4 years in the Coast Guard. Like I say, my father was in the Coast Guard. He was in a construction battalion. He was a carpenter's mate in the Coast Guard. My granddad on my mother's side, he was a chief bosun mate when he retired. I was a bosun's mate. Second class when I got out of it. And I had thought when I left here, I had gone in the idea of making a career out of it. I really did. It wasn't that much around here to do. And I guess there was two major things changed. I was stationed in Cape May, New Jersey the whole 4 years. I was a seamanship instructor up there. When my rotation date came up, by then I met Sue and married her, and we had Travis was 9 months old, and they wanted to send me to either New York City or Boston. And I said, I ain't going to either one of them places. I'm going to North Carolina.
How did it feel to come home?
Well, things have changed a lot. I mean, I come home, about once a month, once every 6 weeks. But like I say, most everybody I grew up with were going to school or whatever. You see a few of your friends. And of course, that whole era in there. I mean, there's a lot of disillusioned people. All this mess of war protesting and all. I mean, I've seen a lot of that firsthand, being in the military. It never was a problem with me. I mean, I feel like that you got a certain devotion to duty. I mean, if they just sent me over there, I'd have gone. I wouldn't argue about it. And I don't think too much of draft dodgers, never have.
And you ended up not getting drafted.
No, I didn't want to be drafted. I mean, I come from a Coast Guard background. That was where I was going to go. And there was a lot of coasties over there. And rivers, they had some of the worst duty over there. But the biggest thing I saw that kind of irked me at the time, but it's worked out all right in a sense. A lot of people that didn't get drafted or had some way of getting deferred to school and all seemed to have got a jump on us that did serve along that time.
Interesting.
A lot of, I mean.
So did you serve but through the Coast Guard? Is that?
Yeah, I was in 4 years.
So you were over?
Cape May, New Jersey.
Okay, so you served here. You never went over?
I never went overseas.
But that's where you did your time. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I went up there and went through boot camp, and I was with the drill team that was there at the base, and my rotation come up to go to a duty station, and train agent called me over there and she says, look, we're forming what we call a T company. There's 5 permanent people going to stay here with this honor guard for a year, billet. And we want to know if you would like to have one of those positions as the gunner's mate, really as the gunny, because they had a bunch of Springfield rifles that keep together. I used to keep them, polish them up and all that stuff. So I said, yeah, I'll stay here. Well, in the meantime, within that year, I was on the list for 3rd class bosun mate when the rotation date come up for a seaman. And the training agent called me over again and said, look, you're going to make 3rd class in September. Your rotation's date in July. He says, we got an opening at the boat docks. If you go down there, you can stay here stay here the whole 4 years. I said, send me down there. At least I knew where I was going to go.
Exactly. Smart.
So I went to the boat dock section as a seaman, as a full seaman, made 3rd class, made 2nd class in 26 months. And stayed there the whole 4 years. Seamanship instructor.
So when did carving enter
Long before that.
When did you start carving?
I started whittling, as I call it, about 8th, 9th grade, somewhere on there. And I started playing with it. The first ducks right on that corner, that little buffalo head I made in 1963.
Really?
or 62, somewhere along there. And it was out of necessity because I loved to hunt and mess around. My uncles and all them had decoys and all, but I wanted decoys of my own, so I started making a few ducks along. And then every now and then I'd make a shorebird and give it to a friend for a present or something like this. And there was a lady that was here in Moorhead that was the manager of a gift shop. Can't think of her first name now. That's Art Gill's mother. You know Art Gill? Got a communication anyway. Nancy. I think her name was Nancy. Nancy Gill? Nancy? That sounds right. Anyway. She was manager of DG's at that time, and I'd seen her somewhere, and she'd seen some of my work. She asked me if I wanted to sell some of it to put in that gift shop.
So what was DG's?
It was a gift shop. It still is on the waterfront there. Bookstore more now, but it used to be across the road from where it's at, and that building that's got that pub in it. I can't think of the name of that now. They changed it was Blue Peter. They changed it to something else now, right across the road there. Anyway, so I made a few things, and the wife got involved in it as a dare. When I was up at the Coast Guard base and I had duty nights, I used to whittle duck heads out and mess around there. The boys there with me, they mess around with trying to do it. It was a good laughs anyway. I was making a bird one night there at the kitchen table and messing with painting it. She said, "I don't know nothing about what that bird's supposed to look like, but I think I can paint it better than that." And I said, "Try it." And she painted it. I said, "Yeah, you got a job now." So she's been painting them ever since.
Has she ever done any carving?
She tried it one time, but she didn't like that side of it. But she did get where she could paint pretty. She makes a pretty fair paint, what we call slick decoy.
She got recognized for that,
Yeah.
didn't she? You all were featured
carver
carvers
a couple years ago, and
98 or whatever it was.
the first show, which was a redhead, she won the painting contest with it.
Great. Now tell me more about your family's history in carving. Who did you learn from?
Well, my granddaddy on my daddy's side was Pappy Joe Fulcher. And I don't know who taught him, but he used to sit around and just whittle. Yeah, he was, like I say, he was an old man when he was, what, 60 when I was born, I guess. But anyway, he'd make little ducks and little things like that. And I mean, he was very talented doing most anything he wanted to. I had a boat baler over there he made and some other stuff. Anyway, he'd sit down there, him and all these cronies there in his later years, and take a red cedar block and just sit there and make curls. And they'd be that deep around their feet. But I got interested in the knives and messed with him. And of course, my daddy was a carpenter. And Daddy never did a whole lot of whittling. He did a lot of sawing out things, boats mostly. And he did, with my uncle, in the early 50s, make a bunch of court geese decoys. And he did hunt. My both granddaddies hunted.
Mm-hmm. But your father didn't carve much.
No,
you skipped a generation there.
He loved to hunt, though, the hunting side of it. He stayed with that. But when my mother and him got married, her brothers, Daddy and her oldest brother, were exactly a year apart, same birthday, and they were pals to the day they both died. You know, Uncle Monty died before Monty Nelson from Atlantic, and he was probably the most instrumental to me in hunting anybody I ever dealt with, because that man loved to hunt. He was a commercial fisherman. He did it all, but he would spend 90% of the winter on the Outer Banks. He'd go there Sunday, stay to Friday, come home, take a shower, eat Sunday dinner, and go right back. And we had a camp down there that Park Service took when they took over, because it was a squatted camp. I mean, we didn't have no right to the land and none of that stuff, but there's still hard feelings as far as I'm concerned over that deal, along with a lot of other people in this county.
Yeah, I've heard, yeah.
But they would go down there. It wasn't just a hunting deal with them, though. They had pound nets in the wintertime. They fished the pound nets, and that was somewhere for them to stay, which if it got bad and they couldn't get home, they had the camp to go to. And thing. So it was more than just a hunting camp. But if it got bad and they couldn't fish the nets, why did they hunt? And they'd, eat a lot of it, bring some of it home, freeze it, trade it. Monty used to trade to some other hunters, trade ducks for deer meat and stuff like that. And they'd never sell nothing. It was illegal to sell it, but there was a lot of older people around Atlantic. He'd look out for them. A pair of ducks here, a pair of ducks there, that kind of way.
How much was it subsistence hunting, and when did that change?
That probably changed that around just after World War I. The law changed that. They did away with sink boxes and put limits. The sink box was a deadly thing in Core Sound. And basically what it is a coffin-like thing with a bunch of decoys, and when you're laying down it, you're actually below the water. And the ducks can't even see it's there. And diving ducks, such as redheads, canvasbacks, stuff like that, would just they tend to bunch up anyway. It wasn't uncommon for a bushwhacking rig of 2 or 3 people working that thing kill 100 ducks a day.
Wow.
So they in 1918 and they put laws on sink boxes and baiting and restricted the guns to 3 shots, and some had extensions 5, 6, and 8 shots on them, and hunting at night, what they called firelighting or moonlighting. And so that more or less did away with the market hunting because it just wasn't practical. Well, you couldn't, and they outlawed the selling it. That come along with it.
What about for feeding the family? I mean,
Now that kept right on.
People have talked about that as being.
Yeah, that kept right on. Right now today, if you go to Harker's Island or the Solder Pad in spring, that's like loons have been on the non-game list for years, but they're still shot. As, Harker's Island goose or Solder Pad turkey.
Yeah.
But
So was hunting as important to you as the carving?
it was to me. It's what started me carving. I love it, and I do it now. I maintain a rig of somewhere between 500 and 600 wooden decoys and about that many plastic ones.
Wow.
Right to this day. Some haven't been in the water in 20 years, but most of them have. And well, back there when we had the camp over there, let me straighten it out a little bit. Like I say, my uncles, Monty Nelson, Lawrence Nelson, Frank Nelson, a great uncle, Avon Mason. And Uncle Avon actually had camps over there at one time. He carried fishing parties in the summer and hunting parties in the winter. But we'd go there, they'd go there, like I say, they would be working out of there with their pound nets and stuff. And we'd build blinds, that family would, up and down the beach. And when they quit long hauling, he'd take his long hauling skiff, which was about 22 foot long, 6 foot wide, big open boat, and load her up with all the decoys and take them down there, and they'd stay till the spring. Nobody'd bother them. And each one of them blinds would have a pile of decoys in it. So it got bad, all they had to do was either walk or drive. Sometimes they had old cars over there too at times. They just, go to the blind, put the decoys in it out and hunt there. When they got through, pick them up, put them back in the blind. You couldn't do it today. They'd be stolen before you left it.
No kidding, yeah.
But I can remember as a kid, my daddy, like I say, he was a carpenter all his life here in Moorhead, but come hunting season, for about, from the time, the first time I went down there, I was 8 years old. First duck I ever killed was 8 years old. Shot with a 410 shotgun. And that's a story in itself. He went down there and that same Uncle Monty, Daddy had walked offshore to a stake blind offshore, and there was a pond behind it there where ducks were coming to. He said, I'm going to take Joey, is what they called me. He said, I'm going to take him there in the marsh and see if they can't kill it. They can kill a duck. So I sit there. Here come 3 big black ducks, and they flew through there, circled. I sit right there to shoot. He looks around at me. Of course, he had a semi-automatic shotgun. Monty did. I had a single barrel 410. He says, "Why did you shoot at them ducks?" I says, "I was waiting for them to light so I get all 3 of them." He looks at me and says, "They come back by here, you shoot at something." They come back, and there were just about 20 yards out, about 3 foot apart in a straight line. I aimed at the front one, pulled the trigger, killed the back one, stone dead. Old big great black duck. I'll never forget it. I was some kind of tickled.
Yeah. Now, some people have talked about that carving the decoys, even just being around them, makes them remember all the different experiences that they had.
I tell you what it is. I did more hunting this past winter than I have in years because I just took the time to do it. Travis and I hunted together, so he did a little bit of guiding for Adams Creek Gun Club down there this year. I had a chance to go more often. And I don't get the thrill out of shooting it that I used to get. The thrill I get in is decoying it. Knowing that my decoys can bring them to me anytime I want them. My favorite thing to shoot is the Canada goose, always has been. And there's a moratorium on them in this county now unless you shoot the local ones. And to me, that's the ultimate in waterfowl hunting around here is the geese. Always, some people like to shoot certain ducks better, but I always did like to shoot the geese. And there's a few things I can remember. I sit there and watch them fly up and down the banks or fly in there, the decoys and come to it. And I remember times when I was down there as a young, sitting there all day long. I've been out there. My daddy and I used to go out there, or my uncle, or sometimes by myself, or with one of my cousins. We'd get up 4 o'clock in the morning, eat breakfast, be in that blind hour before daylight, decoys out, and sit there, and it'd be way after dark for ever come out of it all day long, for 3 or 4 or 5 days straight. And from the time I was 8 years old till I went off in the service, every Thanksgiving during the hunting season, Thanksgiving we'd eat dinner, head to banks till that 4-day holiday. Now I had to come back and go to school. Christmas Day we eat Christmas dinner, and that whole week after Christmas we had off. I'd spend the banks 6-7 days straight.
Was that your favorite place to hunt?
It was my Core Banks yes, it was.
What about it was so good?
Well, the ducks were there. We had the camp down there. The water was shallow enough you could walk most everywhere, sandy bottoms. You hunt around here, everything's muddy as the devil. Tides didn't fluctuate that much. The wind drove the tide, drove the tide more than anything down there. You were hunting around Moorhead, you got a 3.5 foot tide. Everywhere you got to go, you got to wait high tide to get out or high tide to get in. It was aggravating to have to hunt that way. And well, it was just there. I mean, like I said, the family had it there. It was just. I think that was probably the ultimate thing for anybody that loved to hunt, to grow up being able to do that. I mean, I know Travis misses it because it's not there. He was fortunate enough to go down there a couple times. My uncle had a houseboat we stayed on because the camp was going on, but he never did have the opportunity to hunt it the way I did. And I mean, no fooling about it. It was set up right. I mean, they had places they had baited, but the ducks were coming to it.
Right.
And things like that. But the Park Service changed all that. And if they didn't, nothing else. Last time I was at Portsmouth hunting, we stayed on a houseboat down there. I would say it's probably been 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago. I went out on that sandy flat and that beach there, right back of what's called the Evergreens. Had a spread out. And I looked over on the sand dune, there's 2 park rangers standing over field glasses looking at you. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I don't like big brother standing over my shoulder hunting. Just the thought of it makes me mad. And that's the way it is if you go down there. And so I have quit going messing with it. It's just not worth the aggravation. And if nothing else, they're harassing you all the time. They're checking this, they're checking that. They got signs on there, don't walk on the beach, don't walk on the grass. They gripe if you got a dog and you turn him loose. And, I mean, you got retrievers, they got to go to the bathroom once in a while. They're going to go ashore somewhere.
You had said before about the thrill of having your decoy draw the ducks. Can you tell me more about carving and what you do that draws them?
Well, every species of duck acts a little different. Um, I'm superstitious about some things. Black ducks, for instance, and this is no really scientific proven method, but I don't like to use even numbers. 5, 7.
It's like fishermen all have their own.
Not a whole
thing.
lot of.
Yeah.
I don't like to put a lot of black duck decoys out. 3 here, 2 there, one over. 5, 7, one over by itself.
What is it about the even numbers thing?
It's just
Thinking it doesn't work as well?
It's just one of my pet things.
Yeah, yeah. What are your other pet things?
I like to, and if I'm hunting diving ducks, the more you got, the better it is. I mean, they conjugate in big numbers, so you want big numbers of decoys. You got to compete with nature. Contrary to what people think, if you're hunting shallow water, light, flat bottom decoys work fine. If you're hunting big open water, the heavier the decoy, the better it is, as far as I'm concerned. Because you get in a chop, there's nothing worse than to see them plastic ones go clip, 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 clip. The ducks are coming in, you looking out there, there's 2 or 3 of them going flip, 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 or 4 or 5 of them belly up. I mean, you get that out of wooden decoys that you can't get out of plastic ones. Another thing, most of your plastic ones all look like they're scared to death. The geese are like, throw the binders on.
Right.
I like to try to make most of my decoys in their heads are turned a little bit. There'll be sleepers, there'll be crook neck ones, and different things in it. Some tip ups, just a tail of them. Try to make things look natural. I mean, that's the way they're and certain ducks mingle with other ducks, and certain ducks don't. And that's just comes from plain watching them and experience of hunting them. And you can scare them off by the way you say it just as good as you can decoy them. And you try to work the ducks upwind of you, so you leave a place somewhere within shotgun range right in front of you. The worst thing ever happened to me as far as hunting, steel shot. That took a lot of, and I still haven't got it completely figured out. I don't think it's practical for what we're down here in this big sound, as far as what the general deal was. Lead poison, the ducks eating the pellets off the bottom.
So you mean the kind of shots that you use, yeah.
Lead carries better than steel, and it patterns better than steel, and the chokes of the guns. I've always hunted with a Browning automatic. Some of my Belgian guns, I don't shoot that mess through. It don't do it any good. It don't pattern good through a choke gun to start with. And it's taken me a little time to play with it. Stuff that normally that I would shoot down dead right there, you had to shoot 2 and 3 times with steel because it just don't kill it. So I don't see where to gain. There's a lot of crippled birds getting off that normally would be dead. But that's here and there too. The decoys that I make tend to, like I say, I hollow the body, but I put weight on them to make them so they're right. The heads are most of them are low, once in a while, but nothing real outrageous. They're made to look realistic, and the colors, painting the decoy, and this is where a lot of us differ in what is a decoy and what's a decorative bird. A lot of these contests, I don't enter in these contests. What I call decoying in them contests. A decoy's got to be made so you can paint. A general layman can paint it over every 2 or 3 years from using it. It's not this finer feather stroke stuff like.
Say again.
The ducks that we make that's the fancier ducks are slicks. There's no texturing to the bottom.
Okay, slick meaning it's a smooth surface.
Smooth
Yeah.
surface. There might be, in this case, a little bit of carving around his bill, but that's a black duck.
That's beautiful. Really beautiful.
And
decorative meaning you've got, it's a close patterning
it's
after the
more
bird
feather
itself.
pattern, yeah. Whereas if this was one of my gunning decoys, it would have probably none of this on it. It'd just be the basic color.
So do you do both?
I'll do both.
Yeah. Which are your favorites, both to use and to make?
The hunting decoys always have been. And I collect hunting decoys. I
kind of see them all. Tell me about what you've got here and why you've got them.
It's redheads mostly because the major winner of the redhead population winters in Core Sound. Like the canvasbacks and the Chesapeake, the redhead always was a Core Sound bird. And I just picked that as a bird to target for getting different people. Most of what I've got here is from people that I knew or do know now. Tried to get one or a pair from most everybody that's been around. And I got one or two just in other places. There's one that's a Canadian decoy and different things like this. But the redhead was always the predominant diving duck in Core Sound.
Now, what do you make mostly?
Duck
Redheads beyond, I mean, do you have a range that you make?
I make a little bit of all of it.
That's what I've been hearing.
I actually, probably now we make more birds, shorebirds, than we do the ducks, really.
And why's that?
As far as selling profit, the people more readily recognize shorebirds. They see them more often than the ducks. I mean, you see ducks, but you see them at a distance. Shorebirds you can see right on the shore. And most people, you ask them a duck and a mallard, that's the only duck they know. Up until about 8 or 10 years ago, I didn't even own a mallard decoy.
That's great.
I do have a few wooden ones I've made. Basically it's the same body that the black duck is.
Now, what is this made of? What materials do you use?
That is juniper. And it's hollowed out. You don't have to wait on it.
Now, some people I've been talking to use Tupelo gum. Tell me why you use
I don't
juniper
like
over
Tupelo. Tupelo, start with it works good for machine work because it has little or no grain. You can cross cut it with motorized tools and all. Juniper was always a traditional wood to make decoys out of down here. And I like it the way it works. I work them by hand. They're
So you don't use power tools?
oh, no, I didn't say that now. I cut the shape out with a bandsaw, but I rough him out with a draw knife. And then wood rasping is sanded. I do have a bag sander, inflatable sander. I didn't have that till about 10 years ago. I used to sand them every one by hand. You're talking about a job. And I still had to do a lot of bird stuff by hand because they're too small really go on the sander. But
How does that differ from your grandfather?
he probably never sanded nothing. They probably, they were chopped out and wood rasped as close as they could get them and painted. And most of the paint schemes that they used was everyday paint they had. In this area, North Carolina's never been noted for real pretty decoys as some of the other areas. There's been a few that made decorative birds, but Emerald Corral and up in the north, they had fancy paint jobs on them. But here, most of the people that worked on it was a tool and it was numbers. And Carteret County decoys, if you find them, the bulk of them is going to be a redhead or a blackhead, which is a scup, or a goose or a brand. That's the four that you're going to find most of.
So when you said numbers, when it's numbers, what were you meaning? In terms
The bigger the rig, the better it show up. So it wasn't uncommon for 2 or 3 people to work together, especially market gunning. They'd have big rigs, you know, I'm talking 500-600 decoys. They'd go out there with one of those batteries or sink boxes, and they'd take turns sitting in the thing because it was cold and wet. And back in those days, they didn't have the foul weather gear you got now, all this Gore-Tex and that stuff. It was old oilskins. My granddaddy tells me about hip boots. The first pair he had, to stay warm, they used to take newspaper, wrap their feet in newspaper before they put their feet in them, and stuff like that. And the old slickers and getting that thing lay there all day long. The water, you had a little lead shield you turned up to keep the waves running across it. The water trickled down on you. And most of the gunning was with double barrels. And a lot of it black powder too. This I'm talking about 1880, 90 along there when they were kids. He was born 1876, so he saw a lot of changes in his lifetime. And right on up till smokeless powder come into being somewhere around the turn of the century. Then he started getting repeating arms, such as pump guns and semi-automatics. And right on up to heyday, which ended probably in 1934, I think, from the final act that finally put an end to the commercial hunting. But it wasn't uncommon for them to shoot 100, 150 ducks a day and take turns. And then they had to stay up all night loading shells. A lot of their shells were hand loads. And get in there with 2 or 3 double barrels, shoot one, lay it down, and then load all 3 of them, that kind of work. And they went to extremes with that too. Some had 8 gauges, 10 gauges, big guns. Law restricts you now to a 10 gauge, no bigger. They had things called putt guns, which are like a cannon. Punt guns, yeah. P-U-N-T, excuse me.
So, we've covered a lot of good ground here. How do you think the museum can exhibit some of these really important aspects of both hunting and carving?
I don't know exactly what they've acquired so far, and I know that they get, you know, decoys. I know 2 or 3 collections right here in the county that's probably going to go to them. I don't know for sure where Roy Hilton Willis is going to end up with his decoys, but he's got a good selection of them. And so there was a big influx too in the county of decoys back there in the 20s and 30s with these gun clubs.
Right.
There was a lot of decoys that come down here from Maryland, Virginia, Hollies and stuff like this that these wealthy people brought down here to hunt these clubs. And you find a lot of those influence the makers here, the style. You're going to find a lot of those bodies with heads on them that made by somebody else and things like this. And the caretakers of these clubhouses were guides. They were commercial fishermen in all season. I know one, and he's not real close related to me. If he is Mitchell Fulcher. I know you hear this name. But
yeah.
He was probably
He
was probably the premier carver for his style. But he was the caretaker for that Core Banks Club for years, and see, he put a lot of heads on everything. I mean, that was his job. They'd break a duck head, he'd put a head on it. By the next hunting season, they maintain these big rigs.
Do you have a relationship to him? I mean, is there some?
It is. If it is, it's on the Nelson side. Believe it or not, my Daly's mother was a Fulcher from Stacy. So, I'll tell you one better than that. My daddy's mother on this side was a Nelson, and she was born on Browns Island, right over between Hargers Island and Marshburg.
It's confusing.
So I got I got two different sides of it. It's confusing.
Yeah.
That it is.
Yeah. So somewhere there's probably a link.
Probably
Like
somewhere these Fulchers is a link, and like I say, it goes back where there was. I've heard there was 2 brothers, a Reuben and a Thomas, and I believe Mitchell come off the Reuben side of it, and I think my family come off the Thomas side of it.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. Great.
But I'm not certain of that. I can go back with the Josephs to late 1700s.
Do you go back to what was that?
1718.
But you said Joseph.
The Joseph Fulcher.
The Joseph Fulcher. Okay, so that's.
Well,
Sue is joining us now, not Travis. I'm saying that for the
Oh,
tape,
okay.
because I got the tape on
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Well, let's see. I was just out in St. Louis, and at the base of the Gateway Arch, they have exhibits set up, talking about Lewis and Clark's journey from St. Louis to the ocean, to the Pacific Ocean, and they use a lot of dioramic displays in there. So I would think, particularly in the exhibits where where you're talking about the punt guns and the market hunters, and you wouldn't, and things like that, there's nothing that most people from outside the area have ever seen to compare with what you would be describing, and describing it in words or just showing the artifacts that were used to hunt in this way isn't enough. It's hard to visualize. And the setups that they actually use cover such a broad expanse, they would have to be, scaled down dioramas showing a setup that a market hunter would use or whatever, because that was how people in the county at the end of the last century, or the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, hunted, And also, there's a man in Atlantic that always wins the artifacts display at the Decoy Festival, and he and his grandson have this great eye for setting up a display so that it looks like an old workshop, or it looks like an old store, or whatever. And displays like that would be interesting, I would think.
Well, it's just like the tools of the trade. You can go there and you can throw it on the table, and then everybody, what's that? And it's got a little caption in there, such and such. You have no idea what it was used, how it was used.
But if you got a workbench set up with a place where a duck is mounted in a vise, like it would be to use a draw knife on it, and the wood shavings laying on the floor, and some of the tools laying around that would be used to do that, and maybe even an area adjacent where a demonstration could be done with somebody doing, or even in that area, have it set up like that, but have it be a working area so that somebody could come in and actually demonstrate right there on the museum floor, rather than have it be a separate place away from the main exhibit area.
So artifacts, but you're also talking about some kind of description or context so people know how.
Explain exactly how this was used in the trade. In other words, for instance, a gunning light, a firelight light. You just sit there, there's like a lantern in a box.
But if you've got a diorama set up with a gunning light on the bow of a boat, and everything darkened so that you can see that the light would shine out on the water and cast a shadow, so that and to the ducks it would appear to be the moon coming up on the horizon, because the hunters are down low in the boat and everything's painted black. You can, with the diorama, they can see how it was used. But if you say that it's a light, a gunning light, they would.
See, people got a misconception about firelighting ducks and spotlighting deer. You're blinding the deer, but you're not trying to blind the ducks. What you're doing, you're fixing a false horizon for them to look at.
Interesting, yeah.
In other words, you don't need a bright light as much as you need just one that blocks you from looking past the light.
So that they couldn't see the hunters behind.
Right.
See, people think that firelighting ducks is blinding the ducks. You don't blind the ducks. You just give them the illusion that light is staying in one place. Actually, it's getting closer all the time, but they don't realize that, because you don't want a direct spot.
And if there are collections like Roy Hilton's got a lot of ducks of his father's, in collections like that where there's a lot of different ducks made by one person,
Right.
It's interesting to have a photograph and sort of biographical information about the maker there, because I know that they've done that with his father has some boat models up in the Museum of Natural History, and in the display where his boats are, there's a photograph of him and different things, different biographical tidbits about him. And it's interesting to us naturally, but I would think that it would be more interesting for people to be able to put a face to the name of the maker.
Right. But just to follow that, so did your father make model boats? Yeah.
Okay.
So he didn't actually carve. He didn't do decoys, but he did.
He did
Well, that's
boats.
interesting. Yeah. So so really whittling, carving all the way down.
Mhm.
Yeah. Neat.
That toolbox over there, and I brought it in out of the shop.
What was his?
Dad died about a year and a half ago. This box right here, about a year this is an area that I don't like to get too far into because there's a lot of mixed feelings about that. There's so much intermingling in the boating industry, and the fishing industry, and the hunting industry as a money-making industry for Carter County, especially in the early part of its livelihood. It's all intermingled, but we already have a maritime museum to cover the marine boat side of it. And whether or not a museum devoted strictly to waterfowl would support itself or not, that's a question too.
Okay.
So it might become an economic necessity to spread it out,
To have a range.
or to have a bigger
Yeah.
range.
What should that range include?
I think it ought to stick with the traditional stuff that was born here in this county. Right on up to the sports fishermen with the flower barrels and all that come out of Harker's Island and Marshallburg area, since World War II.
So that some recreational.
Maybe, but I think it ought to be maybe set in one little area or something, not a big influence all over. I think that time will tell, but I believe that there's going to be enough artifacts, photographs, stories and stuff to make good displays. I really do. My problem with the whole thing, like I say, is Doug Waterfowl Museum, so it ought to be waterfowl related. I know there's some other feelings about that, but that was a dream of most of us that were involved in trying to get it going. We felt like we had a maritime museum. We've got an aquarium, and the Maritime Museum has a good collection of decoys. I don't think they got but a half of them out. There's James Lewis, that people, when he died, donated his whole collection.
What about if the museum is trying to be the Core Sound Waterfowl Museum and it's trying to represent Down East traditions? How should they develop exhibits that would reflect the specific Down East traditions?
Well, you might go to a typical family growing up and, what they do. I mean, like I say, my daddy's mother was born on Browns Island. It was called Craney Island then. And the women's place in this whole circle is a lot more involved in it than people realize too. I've got some of the gauges. My grandmother, all the women back then used to make the nets, linen thread. So that's something people don't realize. A lot of these nets were handmade. The actual everyday workings of some of these fish operations, the heading the shrimp, the packing the fish, and a lot of that stuff, picking the crabs and all, and the crab houses stuff. Women did that. They didn't do much shucking oysters because that was brutal on your hands.
Yeah. How do you think the women's involvement in net making and processing could be featured?
Well, it's just like I said. I don't know if there's any pictures existing of them doing it. I know that I have some of the gauges that my granddaddy made out of cedar, where they sit there and she tie the knots around and pull it off and then start tying them together and go on. They would cook for the family. The everyday duties, and really, most of your water families, if he was on the water all day long, they did the gardening and they did the washing, and they did most of the household chores, really.
What about, do you think that,
And a doer drama or something of that, showing what a typical household was like on Portsmouth Island in 1890 or something.
what about, should those traditions be featured as part of other
Maybe
fishing
special
or
things.
separate?
Maybe special things like a monthly deal or something. I could see that better than have or like one little area devoted to Down East life or something. How they related back to it, but
Right.
not necessarily intermingled all through the museum.
I guess I was meaning the women's roles in, say, net making and processing, which are really about
Yeah.
fishing. Should those be part of just the overall should it be highlighted as something separate?
I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, a lot of people think it's all, the men did it all, but they didn't.
A number of people have pointed that out, both women and men. A number of men have said that piece of the story is really important.
I know, and a lot of the women went with their husbands, mullet netting and stuff like that, and clamming with rape. There's so many different ways that the catching methods have changed a lot too. So back there, when you didn't have the power and all, it was predominantly all hand done. I mean, they pulled the nets by hand. They got there, Sally. They get there with a rake by hand. Now you get there with a dredge, drag it behind a boat, you pull a shrimp trawl. And another big thing with the shrimping industry never took hold here until after World War II, and refrigeration.
Right.
I mean, that was a big problem with shrimp and any perishable seafood, crabs too. So, in order to sell crabs, they had to keep them alive because there wasn't no freezers to freeze it. The fish that...
But they packed them in seaweed.
Well, they did the crabs, but the fish were salted, most of those, and dried that way. And that way you could keep them, ship them in wooden barrels, pickle them.
How important is it to address technology and its effects? Because that's had a huge impact. Refrigeration was huge.
The refrigeration was probably the biggest step in making it where you could catch seafood in mass and keep it. I mean, any other time before that, you catch what you could process in a day, and that's all you mess with, whether you sold it or what you did with it.
Right.
Same way with the menhaden industry. I mean, that's what made all these menhaden factories up and down the coast. They had to be within a day's run of them catching the fish, or they rot on the boat.
Right. That and the power block made a big difference too.
Yeah, power blocking, pumping the mess in and out instead of bailing it all.
Right.
The intercombustible engines in the boats made you had a row around all of them.
What about if there were 3 rooms in the museum? What should those 3 rooms feature?
You mean it's like separate from the library that they're planning and stuff like that? You're talking about 3 display rooms?
Yeah, like say 3 different display rooms.
If you're going on the heritage thing, one of them's got to figure the boat industry,
Boat building industry,
somewhere in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not completely a thing of the past. They're still building a few of them,
Yeah.
and it probably
The decoys in the boat building and the
it
commercial.
probably made more money than decoys ever thought of making.
Well, the decoys
Well,
hadn't made any money in the county until
Well, a decoy wasn't
modern
it wasn't an industry in this county.
right.
There
Not
wasn't
like it
there
was
wasn't
in
any
Michigan and places
commercial.
where they had the factories.
Well, there wasn't any commercial venture for it.
The hunters made the decoys that they used
It was more of a sport deal though.
to
here.
market hunt with.
It was always a
Or
sport deal.
sport, yeah.
Even with the clubs and all, it was a sport deal.
Right,
Rich and famous.
right.
I mean, the local people, they hunted for
Put meat on the table.
yeah, necessity, either a market hunt or eat or sell, or they guided for some rich person to come down there to sport. I mean, that was the hunting industry.
Yep.
And the decoy was just a tool of a trade.
Mm-hmm.
And but the boats again, in the day that was, especially when I was growing up, when they first started that flower bow boat, there was 5 or 6 boat builders on Harker's Island and Willis Craft there to Williston and Marshallburg and places like that. That's where they come out of, and it did employ a lot of people. Gave a lot of people a chance to work, and a lot of those people right now work at Jarrett Bay.
But didn't
Or
a lot
descendants.
of the people that worked in the boat building industry, the boat building was what they did in the off season for the commercial fishing.
Some of them did, some of them didn't.
So I mean, it wasn't that the economy was based really on any one thing. It was what they could do at certain times of the year to make
You got
a living.
to survive in Carter County. You got to be versatile.
That's another one of those qualities of Downeaster.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about the 3rd room? Because you said decoys, boat building.
And probably the other one ought to be on down East Well of Life. I mean, I would go back to just what we were talking about. The typical way, pick up, say 1890 as a year, or somewhere back before, or
It would
maybe
be
have
neat
it
to
have
do
it
it.
both ways to compare the differences of how a family then and a family now made their year.
Some people have talked about,
3-season deal or 4-season deal. What they would be doing in the winter time and what you would today. What you how you know you go plug something in. You got heat. You don't have to chop trees.
right, right. So some people have also talked about featuring the different communities of Down East.
Mm-hmm.
How important is that?
To talk to anyone from them communities, it
This
probably
would be really important, but I don't know how much.
you get back to that clandestine theory there again, but and that's not as much as it used to be. The onset,
Yes, it is. It still is.
I started to clarify myself a little bit.
Excuse me.
Did you grow up in the
No,
Klan?
no. See, we've lived here. We moved back here. He's from here originally. We moved back here when he got out of the Coast Guard in 1972, and I have now lived in Carteret County longer than I have lived anywhere else. But I'll never be considered a local, and never be accepted.
But you won that painting award.
I know, but it'll never happen.
A
Where
lot
are
of
you originally from?
Well, I was born in Alabama originally, and then my father is an electrician, and he worked for a company, and we moved around like a lot of military families do. So I lived, all over, and
we met
him when
in
we
New
were
Jersey.
living in New Jersey, and we got married after I graduated from high school, and we had lived in New Jersey from 1965 until we moved in 71. So that was the longest block I moved here that I'd ever lived in one place. So, but my parents are from Ohio and Pennsylvania. So,
Different family history.
yeah. But it's just if you're not born here, you're just not from here.
Well, there's another. You'll find that too. It's and this comes up a lot in arguments down there. You say, you're from west of the bridge, Moorheader side of it. A lot of them don't know the ties I got down there. How far back I go back a lot further than a lot of people that are born and raised down there now who knows about. But I don't know. It's there's a lot of pride in it. I mean, I'm proud to say I'm a Down Easter. Just like I'm proud to say I'm a Moorheader.
I think you talked more off tape about your family's history there. You talked about the different traditions, but where were they actually from in Down East?
My daddy's people, the Fulcher side of the family, came from Davis Shore, which is town's, Davis about halfway in the middle of it, I guess. My mother's side of the family are from Atlantic. My daddy's mother was from Browns Island, which is between Harker's Island and Marshallburg.
So you lay claim to a number of different
Localities there.
Yeah.
And my granddaddy, my daddy's daddy, met my grandmother because her brother and him he ran a run boat, a live boat, Sharpie, buying fish for my Uncle Matt Nelson. That's where he met her.
So you did marry a combination of a lot of different communities. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Well, there's Nelsons and Fulchers on both sides. That's the thing about
It's
it.
a wonder they can walk and chew gum at the same time.
And it's not uncommon in this area down here. Some of them married second and third cousins. I don't know how that's ever worked out either. But when you got a community of 300, 400 people and they didn't travel nowhere but by boat, you kind of landlocked them.
Right.
And but my granddaddy on my mother's side, Daley Nelson, was in the Coast Guard. And he was a commercial fisherman, grew up in a commercial fisherman family. He joined the Coast Guard in the old lighthouse service in 1918. He got out for a while, sometime in the 20s, And then the Depression hit, so he went back in and stayed till he retired right after World War II.
So really, the museum would be featuring, I imagine, a lot of the different areas that your whole family grew up in. Are there other traditions here? Because the life-saving, we've talked, you just mentioned the life-saving, we haven't talked about that. How significant would that be?
A lot of people in the Coast Guard got Coast Guard ties in this county, especially down East County. The Fulchers especially, and around Stacy. There's,
But see, a lot of that's addressed at the Maritime Museum.
well, that's what I was
You know,
saying.
a lot of
but
that history is.
the
Yeah, so I don't know how that would all be tied.
Unless it were down east specific, maybe?
Yeah.
Or would that
if
be a
you-
strategy?
Or if you did get into the community thing, you know, the
well, back there, you know, up until, well, what, in the 20s, most of the Coast Guard stations were local people. They're local families. They're all brothers, cousins, whatever, and they lived, you know, even on the Outer Banks the same way. The Scarboroughs, the Midgets, and
That's true, 'cause they would move
Grays.
them around
I mean, there was a lighthouse service. It
Yeah.
wasn't actually the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And that, so it was a big part of the community because that was the paycheck year round, and the retirement at the end of it that Cherry Point brought to the general county.
Mm-hmm.
That was a plush job back then.
Right, that was the equivalent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So got to think of it that way. Then too, on my side of it, like I say, Pappy Joe Fulcher, which is my granddaddy, come to Moorhead. He got in the commercial side of party boating, where he's taking parties for hire for fishing and hunting both. And my Uncle Hubert, which is his eldest son, and my daddy's brother, was a licensed captain, ran a boat. He was also police chief here.
Right.
He was also in the fire department here. And my daddy was also in the fire department here, and I'm in the fire department here.
So it's like
So I mean, it's a lot of
It's a
different,
lot of
different
civic-
things.
civic work along with the other.
Hubert retired police chief here. Daddy was always a volunteer, but he was fire chief. I got a picture of him somewhere. When one was fire chief, one was police chief, shaking hands in front of the police station. And Hubert had over 38 years service. Daddy had 33 years service. And if I lived to see October, I had 35 years service in the Moorhead
Wow.
Fire Department. Volunteer. And
Interesting.
that was something else that just I kind of grew up with. I mean,
That's right. So all of
Yeah.
that has become kind of a family tradition.
yeah.
You know, we were talking before about kind of what makes Down Easters unique. Actually, there was something you said, Sue, that made me think about that. There's something in one ear and out the other. So before we were talking about clannishness, we were talking about the different communities.
They stick together as communities.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
The
And
churches, they're real active in their churches, most of them.
Mhm.
And if they're born Methodist, they stay Methodist. If they're born Baptist, they stay Baptist. There's a little bit of rivalry between churches. And most of them are Protestant. There's very few Catholics or Jewish faith down there. It's either Methodist or Baptist. There's Freeville Baptist, and Harkers Island's a big Mormon.
Mormon community.
Yeah, that
yeah,
kind of is.
definitely. Yeah.
So, but they are active in their churches. And the communities seem to pull together in a catastrophe or emergency. The churches turn out real big toward that kind of stuff. You know, someone dies or whatever, big feeds and things. I mean, community involvement more. Well, you know everybody. It's smaller communities, I think.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of them. I mean, my mother right now, and she's 78 years old. She'll look at me and she said, "Did you know such and such died yesterday and I ain't seen her in years? She's your cousin 15 times removed." I said, "Mom, that's as far back I don't even know." But yeah, we're kin to everybody in the Atlantic somehow or another, but
Yeah.
you know.
So, but that sounds like that's still important now, just as it was generations ago. So that seems to be one quality that has really maintained. Because you were talking before about some qualities have changed as, you know, the economics
Well,
have
that's
changed.
like the boat building deal. For years there, when the wooden boats was the thing, it was a family deal too. Fathers, sons. I mean, they fished together, they put the boats together, and all that. And you can ask the grandson, why you do this? Because that's the way granddaddy or daddy told me, showed me to do it.
It's like the lady that.
There's no scientific reason. It's just the way you learn to do it. And that's like I had a drafting teacher in school that spent a year trying to figure a mathematical reason why you cut the first board on a boat when you plank it the way you do. And I told him, I said, well, to get that boat to bend, to have that tuck in the stern and the dead rise, I mean, that's not that's flat, but you know, you cut a 2-inch curve first third over and come up back third. He said, what makes you do that? I said, because that's the way I was taught to do it. And for years, Brady Lewis and Harker's Island had what they call a drop cord shear. In other words, you tie a line to the bow of it and go to the stern of it and drop that line wherever it did. You got to mark it with a pencil. That's where you cut it off at, or a drop cord.
Right. Now, how have you trained your son? Because I understand that Travis is the next generation here. So now the three of you work together.
Travis grew up
Just watching.
listening to stories, being around my dad, being around my uncles, and he got the bug early. And he started going down banks just about the same time age I did, 8, 7, 8 years old, something like that. It was a little different, but like I say, it was a houseboat versus a camp. But messing around there, and at the time Travis come along, actually my daddy had more time to spend with him to show him little things in the shop than he did with me. Because he was working all the time, you know, when I was growing up, and he'd be out there at night working, and I got there and I looked and sit around watching him do stuff and all. And I asked him why he do something. He explained why, but I didn't ask as many questions as Travis did because I don't think I wanted to know as bad as he did or something. But anyway, as far as the whittling goes, the carving, I think you got to have the talent in your head. I was gifted with I can sit down and draw birds and boats and stuff like that. I can't draw people and deer and duck, but I can draw ducks and I draw stuff like that. He can do that. He's got the instinct to picture it in his head, which a lot of people don't do that. And as far as whittling, you can watch me all day long. I always equivalent to sewing. You watch somebody sew all day long, ain't gonna make you any better. You got to actually get the feeling, sit there and whittle it and make mistakes, and whatever wood you're working with, watch it split or whatever. Now there's ways you do things that can be taught or show or instructed to do. You know, start the way you cut across the grain, and I keep splitting it off. But as far as actually getting a feel, and you do have to have a feel for it to sit there and do it. A lot of people can whittle one side of a bill, can never get the other side the same. I mean, I don't matter how much you try. Everybody can't make a good cook.
Right.
I mean, it's the same type of thing. You got to get in there and play in the kitchen. And my grandmother, my daddy's mother, was one of the best cooks I ever knew. And I don't think she ever had a recipe for nothing.
Right.
It's a little more of that.
Right. Now, with your painting, I heard the story about how you joined in. How is it to be? It seems like there's not a lot of women in the decoy carving world.
If they're partners, most of the time the woman is the one that does the painting. Now, I think Bernie and Gail Corwin are the two exceptions, and their daughter Caroline, because
I think Gail
carves and paints, and Caroline carves and paints. But I think, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other women who carve and paint. Most of the time the women end up doing the painting.
Why do you suppose that is?
I don't know if it's anything other than the fact that you know the way you get pushed into these roles, and it's never been a woman's role, or not often been a woman's role to be involved with the hand tools and that kind of thing, you know. And I personally had never been. My grandfather was a metalsmith and machinist, and and he was a carpenter also and a brick mason. But my dad didn't have a workshop or anything like that, and I wasn't around tools that much, you know, so I just wasn't ever exposed to it. I've tried carving. I don't like it. It's too hard to do, you know. And the painting is something that I can sit down and do, and when I'm in the mood to do it, I could sit there all day long and do it. And if I have to make myself do it, I absolutely hate it. You know, it's just one of those things. But I have never taken any formal training. We've got a lot of reference books and stuff that I use to do the painting, to get the painting designs from or ideas. But I don't know. I just
She'll be
sort of
painting.
stepped into it with both feet.
She'll be painting something. Oh, that's not dark enough, or that's too dark, or that's Well, I don't know. I think so. I said, yeah, but I've seen them enough. I know.
Have you gone out hunting at all?
She has no desire to.
They got swan permits about 10 years ago, and I told them. Travis asked me. He said, "Mom, if we kill a swan, will you cook it?" And I'm one of these kind of people that my meat comes in little white foam trays at the store, and I don't think about its past existence, you know.
Right.
And I said, "I'll cook it if you bring it to me dressed. I don't want to see it with the feathers on because I don't think I could have handled it." But what I didn't think about was that long neck, you know, and it was sort of hard not to know that it was a swan before they put it on the table for me to cook. But I would like to go over to Core Banks one fall and just sit and watch the birds and stuff. But I've never.
Best
done
place to see that's P Island.
it. Yeah, go up there. Yeah.
Yeah, in
I've
Towers.
never done any of that. I've watched a lot of the programs on television, you know, and those kinds of
But
things.
see that
Never done
I think
actually.
that's what I try to do with our birds, just like these strings of. I sit there out of boredom sometime while I was duck hunting and watch them run around the shore and how they act. And I had a lady ask me one time at one of these craft shows. She said, "Look at the table now. I had a bunch of sandpiper singles, and everyone was looking down." She says, "Why do you always make these looking down?" I said, "You ever seen them in the surf? What are they there for? They're looking for something to eat. I mean, they don't just land there just to
Right.
hang out."
Yeah.
I have become more observant when I'm out and around now, and I notice things more, notice the birds and stuff more than I ever did before. And because I know a lot of the places where I deliver the mail now, this time of year, the marsh hens and stuff are nesting, and you can hear them in the marsh with their call, you know, with their babies out there. And of course, all the killdeers, most of the killdeers have hatched out, and they're all like half or 3/4 grown by now. But it's interesting to watch them out in the subdivisions, wandering around in people's yards. I had some people in a subdivision out there last year that had a killdeer build a nest in the middle of their driveway. She just sort of piled up the pine straw and laid her eggs, and so they sat a chair over her nest so that they wouldn't forget about her and run over her when they came in and out. And they just let her take the driveway over until she hatched out her babies, and then everything was fine.
Well, I think we're getting close to the end of this tape here. Is there anything more you'd like to add about what the museum should do or be in the community, or what the exhibits should do?
I can see it being a kind of a beacon to the rest of North Carolina as to show off or tell the heritage of down east. You got a lighthouse right across there to look at.